Stories about people fired on the spot. What happened? Story 1. The probation that never happened. The young man had just graduated from college and, full of hope, took a job at a small startup that seemed like the perfect place to begin his career. The company was attracted by its innovation, informal atmosphere, and friendly team. He gladly accepted the offer of a probationary period, feeling that his skills and knowledge would be in demand. Tuesday was an ordinary fall morning when he stepped into the office for the first time. It was spacious, modestly furnished, but everything had the spirit of a young and ambitious business. The employees were focused, each immersed in his own business. Our hero walked to his desk, a modest place in the corner, overlooking the walls where various company awards and posters with motivational quotes were hung. Barely had time to turn on his computer before he felt someone's presence behind him. It was the owner of the company, a short man with an unremarkable appearance, but with a pronounced charisma. Our hero was full of enthusiasm, expecting that he was about to be greeted with warm words and told about the future project he was going to undertake. But what happened next seemed to knock the ground out from under his feet. The owner of the company stood with a serious face, his gaze hard and cold. The young man felt an uneasiness that grew with every second of silence. Then the owner uttered a short and impassioned sentence. He said that the new employee was not suitable for the company, that he was no longer welcome here. The young man sat in shock, not realizing what was happening. Just now he was starting his career, and just a few minutes later he was being fired. The world seemed to freeze for a moment. Thoughts flashed through his head. It must be a mistake, a misunderstanding that was about to be corrected. Perhaps it was about another person, but no, everything was very clear. The young man, not yet realizing what was happening, began to gather his things. His movements were slow and mechanical, as if he was trying to delay the moment of final realization. At this time, the owner of the company stood nearby, keeping his eyes on him. There was no sympathy or regret in his gaze, only cold wariness, as if he expected that our hero might do something unpredictable. The young man put all his few belongings into his bag, his every action imbued with a sense of the absurdity of what was happening. It seemed to him that this was some nightmare from which he was about to wake up, but nothing indicated that it was a dream. As he walked out of the office, he felt a wave of helplessness and powerlessness wash over his shoulders. In an instant, his future, which had seemed so clear and certain, had turned into an absolute unknown. It was several days before he realized what had really happened. After much deliberation and futile attempts to contact the company, he accidentally learned from a former colleague that the reason for his sudden dismissal was a misunderstanding. The company was looking for a top-level specialist for an important project, but had mistakenly hired him, a lower-level specialist, which was known from the beginning. It would seem that a simple mistake could have been easily corrected, but due to internal bureaucracy and an inability to admit the mistake, the company chose to fire him on the first day. Story 2. Dismissal for asking. Charles has just graduated from college and a new chapter in his life has begun. After weeks of anxious waiting and endless searching, he finally managed to get a job at a small but promising company. The first morning at the new place was filled with hope and excitement. He arrived at the office with a sense of pride and excitement, sitting at his new desk, ready for the challenges ahead. However, his joy was short-lived. Shortly after the workday began, the owner of the company, the man who was to be his mentor and supervisor, approached him and informed him that Charles was fired. Shock and bewilderment overwhelmed the young professional. He could not understand what had happened and, more importantly, why he was in this position. The owner of the company explained that Charles was not really suited to their needs. A Category 1 specialist, they learned, did not meet the requirements that were placed on the candidates. This was surprising since Charles had communicated this as early as the interview. He was candid in indicating that he had level 1 knowledge and skills and was confident that this would not interfere with his job. Unfortunately, it seems that his honesty was not given due consideration. After he gathered his things to leave, the owner watched him warily, as if he feared he might have stolen something. This scene was particularly humiliating and unacceptable to Charles, who had just started his career. He left the office feeling devastated and misunderstood. Charles soon learned that the problem was the company's growing ambitions. At the time, it was looking to expand rapidly, and new employees were required to have higher qualifications and experience than what Charles had. This was creating tension within the company, and the need for higher-level talent was one of the factors that influenced the owner's decision. Story 3. Perfect Frying: The Secret of the Kitchen. Alex was one of those young people who tried to combine work and studies, earning a living as a waiter in a local restaurant. Working in a restaurant was not the easiest job, but it gave him a sense of independence and confidence in his abilities. Every day was filled with hustle and bustle, setting tables, serving guests, coordinating with the kitchen. Alex knew how to handle the flow of guests and was especially proud of the fact that he could remain calm in any situation. Among the regulars, there was one family that the restaurant staff knew by sight. They were parents with 2 children who came in for dinner every week. They had a special request. They always ordered well-fried steaks, but with one condition: no black spots on the meat. It seemed like a simple request, but it was a real challenge for the kitchen. When the family made such an order for the first time, the cooks treated it with professionalism, trying to please the guests. The steaks were cooked over an open flame as always, but once the dishes were on the family's table, the complaints began. One by one, the steaks returned to the kitchen with complaints about the little black spots that the grill inevitably left behind. Alex, as an intermediary between the guests and the kitchen, repeatedly explained to the family that such spots were the result of grilling on fire, but they remained adamant. The situation became more and more tense with each new visit from this family. They were constantly sending dishes back. The cooks were angry, and eventually the atmosphere in the kitchen was heated to the max. Alex, as well as the whole team of waiters, tried to keep friendly and calm, although the kitchen was often heard grumbling about the cranky guests. But one day, when the family came to dine again and place their customary order, something went completely wrong. The cooks had cooked the steaks again, trying to meet all standards, but when the family once again sent them back complaining about black spots, one of the cooks couldn't take it anymore. The whole day had been stressful. The kitchen was working at full capacity, and nerves gave way. The cook took one of the steaks, threw it in the microwave for a few seconds, and handed it back. He figured the guests were just being cranky and no one would notice the switch. Alex, unsuspecting, took the steaks back to the table. The family, as usual, examined the meat and were surprisingly satisfied. Everyone in the kitchen breathed a sigh of relief, but no one thought it was just the calm before the storm. A few days later, when the shift had almost forgotten about the incident with the microwave, the owner of the establishment unexpectedly appeared at the restaurant. He rarely visited the restaurant unannounced, and his appearance was always accompanied by an anxious atmosphere. This day was no exception. The owner looked serious and clearly displeased. It turned out that the family, satisfied at first glance, later complained about the quality of the food. They claimed that the steaks had recently stopped having the flavor they expected from a high-end restaurant. The supervisor called everyone who had worked that day in for a conversation, and after a brief discussion, the truth came to the surface. Alex was horrified to realize that the cook had actually used a microwave instead of a grill, violating all of the restaurant standards. Although he himself had not personally made the decision to heat the steak in this way, the consequences affected everyone. The owner was angry that his restaurant, known for its quality, had allowed such negligence. He took a drastic decision. The entire shift that night was fired. Story 4. Light work with heavy consequences. Austin took a job in the freezer section of the chicken processing plant earlier this year. The job wasn't complicated. The entire shift revolved around 4 key tasks: making boxes for packaging, packing chicken, labeling boxes, and stacking them. The work took place in the cold, but that didn't deter Austin. The freezer shop was a temporary refuge for him in the world of work, a way to keep himself afloat while he searched for something better. The work, though routine, provided a sense of stability, which was especially important to him in these challenging times. Each task on the conveyor belt was done one at a time, succeeding one another at regular intervals. At first glance, the cycle was simple, and most co-workers were used to this constant routine. Austin, too, had gotten into the routine, feeling little discomfort except for one thing: labeling boxes. Although most of the tasks were monotonous but tolerable, labeling was becoming a real torture for Austin. To label the boxes, he had to stand in a bent position. His workplace was not equipped to support a correct posture, and Austin had to literally bend over the conveyor belt, which affected his back more and more every day. In the first few days, he didn't pay much attention to it. writing it off as fatigue. But after a couple of weeks, the real problems began. The pain in his lower back came on like a fog, slowly and gradually, until it became an integral part of his work. Every time he switched to marking, his back began to whine more and more. By the middle of the month, the pain had turned into an agonizing sensation from which there was no escape. Austin tried stretching on short breaks, but this brought only temporary relief. Bending and flexing made things worse, and soon the pain became so severe that Austin could barely move. A pinched nerve in his back became a constant companion of his shifts, and every day at the marking turned into a real ordeal. Another day on the assembly line awaited him one morning when Austin arrived at work after a sleepless night of soreness. He knew that today he would face labeling again. Every step that brought him closer to his workstation reminded him that the real agony was about to begin. As he entered the freezer room, he saw his co-workers silently preparing for their shifts, and the sounds of machines running already filled the air. Austin put on his work clothes and stood in his seat, hoping he could make it through another day. Everything went on as usual until it was time for labeling. Austin started to work, but each label on the box gave him a hard time. The pain in his back was getting worse. At one point, as he bent over to label again, a sharp pain shot through him so badly that he literally froze. His leg began to go numb, and Austin realized he could no longer move. He felt his body stiffen and was forced to lean on the edge of the desk to keep from falling. Colleagues noticed that something was wrong with Austin and rushed to his aid. They helped him to a bench in the far corner of the room where it was a little warmer and called for the foreman. Austin sat, trying to control the pain, but each attempt to straighten up was difficult. After a few minutes, the shift foreman, approached him and, seeing his condition, decided to send him home. But the next day, it happened again. Austin could no longer work at full strength. The pain in his back would not go away, and every bend was difficult. He realized it was impossible to continue at this pace. Every shift was becoming a torture. At some point, his superiors began to notice that Austin was no longer coping with the tasks. His efficiency was dropping, and this affected the entire team. A few days after another incident, he was summoned to the boss's office. There, in a small room with cold walls, Austin was told that he could no longer work in the shop. Story 5. One Day for Sister. During the summer, when Andrew was still a college student, he managed to get a job in the customer service department of a large Canadian supermarket. The job was simple, but it required attention and focus. Customers called about all sorts of things, complaining about the quality of goods, asking to check the availability of certain products, or inquiring about store hours. However, Andrew had one significant advantage over the rest of the staff. He was the only one in the department who was fluent in both English and French. For his knowledge of both languages, he was entitled to an additional supplement to the minimum wage, $1 an hour. This made him an indispensable employee, especially in the multilingual region where he worked. Andrew quickly got involved in the process, learned to solve requests from both English and French-speaking clients, and became an important part of the team. The team appreciated his professionalism, and his superiors knew that Igor could always be counted on, especially on the busiest days. But despite the stable job, Andrew did not see this position as his career. He was preparing for a big step in his life. In 10 weeks, he was going to leave for another city to enroll in graduate school. He had one more summer to finish and say goodbye to this episode of his life so he could immerse himself in further study. One day, news came to him that made him rethink his priorities. His younger sister was graduating from high school, and her graduation party was soon to be held. This moment was important not only for her, but for the entire family. Andrew was proud of his sister and realized that this day would be special for her. He wanted to be by her side at this important moment, to support her and share her joy. But graduation was scheduled for Saturday, and it was one of the busiest days at the supermarket. Saturdays were always challenging. The store was overflowing with customers, and the phone in the service department never went silent. Andrew realized that his bosses would not want to lose such an important employee in the middle of the work week. Nevertheless, boss. He dared to ask for time off. He knew that he might displease his superiors, but this day was of the utmost importance to him. When Andrew approached the manager with his request, he had a look of slight anxiety on his face. He said that it was his sister's graduation and that it was important for him to be there to support her. The manager hesitated, and in that moment, tension hung in the air. It was clear that the answer to this request could affect a lot of things. It was as if time in the manager's office had slowed down. The manager's gaze was cold and evaluating. He realized that Andrew was a valuable employee, and every hour of his absence from the customer service department would cost the company the comfort of its customers. Suddenly, however, the tough question came out. What's more important to you, work or graduation? Andrew knew this moment was crucial. He could say what they expected him to say, leaving his personal interests behind for the sake of work. But Andrew had already made a decision for himself. He answered honestly and clearly. His sister's graduation was more important to him. The manager didn't hesitate long. The decision was made instantly. The same day, Andrew was informed that he was fired. Story 6. Under a barrage of rain and inspections. When Grant first started his working life, he was 16 years old. His first job was as a lifeguard at a swimming pool near his home. The pool was small, and there were few visitors, which made the job fairly relaxing. Grant loved spending time with the children who came to play in the water. The atmosphere was relaxed, and his tasks were not too difficult. As a lifeguard, Grant was subject to regular inspections by the pool owner's son. These checks were an important part of the job as they ensured safety and maintained professional skills. By midsummer, Grant had already successfully passed 2 inspections that went off without any major problems. One day in early August, as heat and sunny days became part of everyday life, dark clouds gathered over the pool. A severe thunderstorm started, and rain poured down from the sky. As a result, the pool was closed to the public. On this day, when everything seemed to be plunged into an atmosphere of anticipation and unpredictability, the pool owner's son, who was also a certified inspector, decided to do another inspection. Despite the fact that the pool was closed and unmanned, the test was not canceled. The driver, relying on his professional reputation and a desire to demonstrate his skills, found himself in front of Grant with the intention of testing his abilities under emergency conditions. The conditions, however, were unusual. In the midst of a thunderstorm, with wind and rain creating dangerous conditions, the inspector indicated that he would simulate a situation requiring rescue. The inspector weighed 396 pounds, and his task was to assess Grant's ability to handle a human rescue under difficult conditions. Grant was still young and inexperienced, and despite the obvious difficulties, he was determined to do his job. He knew that losing his job would be a disaster, especially at such a young age, and he did not want to appear weak. However, when Grant attempted to pull the inspector out of the water, he was confronted with the reality of his limitations. The weight and size of the inspector, combined with the difficult conditions, made the task virtually impossible. Grant's attempts to cope with the situation were futile, and this was obvious to both him and the inspector. The difficult conditions, the thunderstorm, and Grant's own physical capabilities played a crucial role in the failure. After completing the inspection, which turned out to be a complete failure, Grant was summoned to see the inspector. His confidence and self-esteem were suborganized, and he knew that the outcome of the inspection would affect his future. Shortly thereafter, he was notified of his dismissal. Story 7. Trash Challenge. Marcus, a 22-year-old student, was excited about his first work opportunity at a summer tennis camp at a prestigious tennis club. Working as a dishwasher at this exclusive location seemed like a great opportunity to gain experience and earn money. Summer days at the camp were filled with active training, competition, and fun, and Marcus was proud to be part of this dynamic and energetic environment. However, working at camp required not only cleaning dishes, but also regular trash removal, which became especially important during the peak season. The dumpster, which was located in the backyard of the camp, was part of the daily tasks. Marcus was diligent in following all instructions and performing his duties with quality. However, one day the situation got out of control. The dumpster overflowed to the brim, creating a mess and inconvenience for the workers and visitors. Marcus, noticing the problem, immediately notified the club owner, suggesting that the situation might require special solutions. Instead of considering alternative methods of solving the problem, the owner reacted with extreme emotion. He ordered Marcus to climb into a dumpster and start jumping on the garbage to make room for new garbage. This requirement was highly unusual and inadequate given the working conditions and general standards of safety and hygiene. Marcus realized that performing such a task would be extremely uncomfortable and potentially dangerous. Unwilling to obey such an absurd order, Marcus insisted that such a requirement was unacceptable. He suggested that the owner himself demonstrate how he should perform the task. This offer created a tense situation and showed the absurdity of the owner's demand. The owner found himself in a quandary. The situation where his own demand became a matter of public discussion made him realize how absurd his demands were. Marcus did not succumb to the pressure and maintained his dignity even though the situation was difficult. However, the consequences of this conflict did not last long. Shortly after the incident, the owner made the decision to fire Marcus. His resistance and refusal to comply with the order made his position in the club unsustainable, and the job he loved ended abruptly.